Motherhood and the bringing up of children. The mother. To speak of children to the women of Japan is, I think, to speak to them of their dearest, their most sacred subject. Indeed, in no other country in the world have the children taken such an important, such a primordial place. They are, here, the center of care and attention. On them are concentrated, and rightly, the hopes for the future. They are the living promise of growing prosperity for the country. Therefore, the most important work assigned to women in Japan is child-making. Maternity is considered as the principal role of woman. But this is true only so long as we understand what is meant by the word maternity. For to bring children into the world as rabbits do their young, instinctively, ignorantly, machine-like, that certainly cannot be called maternity. True maternity begins with the conscious creation of a being, with the willed shaping of a soul coming to develop and utilize a new body. The true domain of women is the spiritual. We forget it but too often. To bear a child and construct his body almost subconsciously is not enough. The work really commences when, by the power of thought and will, we conceive and create a character capable of manifesting an ideal. And do not say that we have no power for realizing such a thing. Innumerable instances of this very effective power could be brought out as proofs. First of all, the effect of physical environment was recognized and studied long ago. It is by surrounding women with forms of art and beauty that, little by little, the ancient Greeks created the exceptionally harmonious race that they were. Individual instances of the same fact are numerous. It is not rare to see a woman who, while pregnant, had looked at constantly and admired a beautiful picture or statue, given birth to a child after the perfect likeness of this picture or statue. I met several of these instances myself. Among them, I remember very clearly two little girls. They were twins and perfectly beautiful, but the most astonishing was how little like their parents they were. They reminded me of a very famous picture painted by the English artist Reynolds. One day I made this remark to the mother, who immediately exclaimed, "Indeed, is it not so? You will be interested to know that while I was expecting these children, I had, hanging above my bed, a very good reproduction of Reynolds' picture. Before going to sleep, and as soon as I woke, my last and first glance was for that picture, and in my heart I hoped, may my children be like the faces in this picture. You see that I succeeded quite well." In truth, she could be proud of her success, and her example is of great utility for other women. But if we can obtain such results on the physical plane, where the materials are the least plastic, how much more so on the psychological plane, where the influence of thought and will is so powerful? Why accept the obscure bonds of heredity and atavism, which are nothing else than subconscious preferences for our own trend of character, when we can, by concentration and will, call into being a type constructed according to the highest ideal we are able to conceive? With this effort, maternity becomes truly precious and sacred. Indeed, with this, we enter the glorious work of the Spirit, and womanhood rises above animality and its ordinary instincts. efforts towards real humanity and its powers. In this effort, in this attempt, then, lies our true duty. And if this duty was always of the greatest importance, it certainly has taken a capital one in the present turn of the Earth's evolution. Last week I spoke to you about birth, how souls enter a body, and I told you that the body is formed in a very unsatisfactory way for almost everyone. Exceptions are so rare that one can hardly speak of them. I told you that due to this obscure birth, one arrives with a whole physical baggage of things, which generally have to be got rid of, if one truly wants to progress. And someone has quoted my own sentence, which runs like this: "You are brought here by force. The environment is imposed on you by force. The laws of atavism of the milieu by force." And now the person who wrote to me has asked me who does all that. Of course, I could have been more explicit, but I thought I had been clear enough. The body is formed by a man and a woman who become the father and mother, and it is they who don't even have the means of asking the being they are going to bring into the world whether it would like to come or whether this is in accordance with its destiny. And it is on this body they have formed that they impose by force of necessity, and atavism, and environment, later an education, which will almost always be obstacles to its future growth. Therefore, I said here, and I am repeating it, I thought I had been clear enough, that it was about the physical parents and the physical body I was speaking, nothing else. And that the soul which incarnates, whether it be in course of development or fully developed, has to struggle against the circumstances imposed on it by this animal birth, struggle in order to find its true path and again discover its own self fully. That's all. Now, if you have something else to ask. Nobody has anything to say? Sweet mother, is it possible for the mother and father to give birth to ask for the soul they want? To ask? For that, they must have an occult knowledge which they don't usually have. But anyway, what is possible is that instead of doing the thing like an animal driven by instinct or desire, and most of the time without even wanting it, they do it at will, with an aspiration, putting themselves in a state of aspiration and almost of prayer, so that the being they are going to form may be one fit to embody a soul, which they can call down to incarnate in that form. I knew people, not many. This does not often happen, but I still knew some, who chose special circumstances, prepared themselves through special concentration and meditation and aspiration, and sought to bring down into the body they were going to form an exceptional being. In countries of old, and even now in certain countries, the woman who was going to have a child was placed in special conditions of beauty, harmony, peace, and well-being, in very harmonious physical conditions, so that this child could be formed in the best possible conditions. This is obviously what ought to be done, for it is within the reach of human possibilities. Human beings are developed enough for this not to be something quite exceptional, and yet it is quite exceptional, for very few people think of it, while there are innumerable people who have children without even wanting to. That was what I wanted to say. It is possible to call a soul, but one must be at least a little conscious oneself, and must want to do what one does in the best conditions. This is very rare, but it is possible. Inevitably, parents have a particular formation. They are particularly healthy or unhealthy. Even taking things at their best, they have a heap of atavisms, habits, formations in the subconscious and even in the unconscious, which come from their own birth, the environment they have lived in, their own life. And even if they are remarkable people, they have a large number of things which are quite opposed to the true psychic life, even the best of them, even the most conscious. And besides, there is all that is going to happen. Even if one takes a great deal of trouble over the education of one's children, they will come in contact with all sorts of people who will have an influence over them, especially when they are very young. And these influences enter the subconscious. One has to struggle against them later on. I say, even in the best cases, because of the way in which the body is formed at present, you have to face innumerable difficulties, which come more or less from the subconscious, but rise to the surface, and against which you have to struggle before you can become completely free and develop normally. At the risk of removing many illusions in your consciousness, I must tell you something about the source of a mother's love for her child. It is because this child is made of her very own substance, and for quite a long time, relatively long, the material link, the link of substance between mother and child is extremely close. It is as though a bit of her flesh had been taken out and put apart at a distance, and it is only much later that the tie between the two is completely cut. There is a kind of tie, of subtle sensation, such that the mother feels exactly what the child feels, as she would feel it in herself. That, then, is the material basis of the mother's attachment for the child. It is a basis of material identity, nothing else but that. Feeling comes much later. It may come earlier, that depends on people, but I am speaking of the majority. Feeling comes only long afterwards, and it is conditioned. There are all kinds of things. I could speak to you for hours on the subject, but still, this must not be mixed up with love. It is a material identification which makes the mother feel intimately, feel quite concretely and tangibly what the child is feeling. If the child receives a shock, well, the mother feels it. This lasts at least for 2 months. The education of a human being should begin at birth and continue throughout his life. Indeed, if we want this education to have its maximum result, it should begin even before birth. In this case, it is the mother herself who proceeds with this education by means of a twofold action. First, upon herself for her own improvement, and secondly, upon the child whom she is forming physically. For it is certain that the nature of the child to be born depends very much upon the mother who forms it, upon her aspiration and will, as well as upon the material surroundings in which she lives. To see that her thoughts are always beautiful and pure, her feelings always noble and fine, her material surroundings as harmonious as possible and full of great simplicity, this is the part of education which should apply to the mother herself. And if she has in addition a conscious and definite will to form the child according to the highest ideal she can conceive, then the very best conditions will be realized, so that the child can come into the world with his utmost potentialities. How many difficult efforts and useless complications would be avoided in this way? Education, to be complete, must have 5 principal aspects corresponding to the 5 principal activities of the human being: the physical, the vital, the mental, the psychic, and the spiritual. Usually, these phases of education follow chronologically the growth of the individual. This, however, does not mean that one of them should replace another, but that all must continue, completing one another until the end of his life. We propose to study these 5 aspects of education one by one, and also their interrelationships. But before we enter into the details of the subject, I wish to make a recommendation to parents. Most parents, for various reasons, give very little thought to the true education which should be imparted to children. When they have brought a child into the world, provided him with food, satisfied his various material needs, and looked after his health more or less carefully, they think they have fully discharged their duty. Later on, they will send him to school and hand over to the teachers the responsibility for his education. There are other parents who know that their children must be educated and who try to do what they can. But very few, even among those who are most serious and sincere, know that the first thing to do in order to be able to educate a child is to educate oneself, to become conscious and master of oneself so that one never sets a bad example to one's child. For it is, above all, through example that education becomes effective. To speak good words and to give wise advice to a child has very little effect if one does not oneself give him an example of what one teaches. Sincerity, honesty, straightforwardness, courage, disinterestedness, unselfishness, patience, endurance, perseverance, peace, calm, self-control are all things that are taught infinitely better by example than by beautiful speeches. Parents, have a high ideal and always act in accordance with it, and you will see that little by little your child will reflect this ideal in himself and spontaneously manifest the qualities you would like to see expressed in his nature. Quite naturally, a child has respect and admiration for his parents. Unless they are quite unworthy, they will always appear to their child as demigods, whom he will try to imitate as best he can. With very few exceptions, parents are not aware of the disastrous influence that their own defects, impulses, weaknesses, and lack of self-control have on their children. If you wish to be respected by a child, have respect for yourself and be worthy of respect at every moment. Never be authoritarian, despotic, impatient, or ill-tempered. When your child asks you a question, do not give him a stupid or silly answer under the pretext that he cannot understand you. You can always make yourself understood if you take enough trouble. And in spite of the popular saying that it is not always good to tell the truth, I affirm that it is always good to tell the truth, but that the art consists in telling it in such a way as to make it accessible to the mind of the hearer. In early life, until he is 12 or 14, the child's mind is hardly open to abstract notions and general ideas. And yet, you can train it to understand these things by using concrete images, symbols, or parables. Up to quite an advanced age, and for some who mentally always remain children, a narrative, a story, a tale well told teach much more than any number of theoretical explanations. Another pitfall to avoid: do not scold your child without good reason, and only when it is quite indispensable. A child who is too often scolded gets hardened to rebuke, and no longer attaches much importance to words or severity of tone. And above all, take good care never to scold him for a fault which you yourself commit. Children are very keen and clear-sighted observers. They soon find out your weaknesses and note them without pity. When a child has done something wrong, see that he confesses it to you spontaneously and frankly. And when he has confessed, With kindness and affection, make him understand what was wrong in his movement so that he will not repeat it, but never scold him. A fault confessed must always be forgiven. You should not allow any fear to come between you and your child. Fear is a pernicious means of education. It invariably gives birth to deceit and lying. Only a discerning affection that is firm yet gentle and an adequate practical knowledge will create the bonds of trust that are indispensable for you to be able to educate your child effectively. And do not forget that you have to control yourself constantly in order to be equal to your task and truly fulfill the duty which you owe your child by the mere fact of having brought him into the world.